The wheat moved like breath. It was mid-morning when the farmer saw her, a flicker of something too still among the golden stalks. He stopped the tractor, pulled off his gloves, and stepped down into the heat. The sun was already biting, cicadas loud in the silence between. At first he thought it was a scarecrow, but there were no posts here. No reason for a child to be out this far. She sat in the middle of the field, cross-legged, motionless. Her hair was long, tangled, the color of soil. Her clothes didn't make sense. Not rags exactly. More like fragments of old cloth, hand-stitched and faded, with tiny patterns that looked like constellations. Symbols. Her skin was dusty, her hands resting gently on her knees, and she was whispering. He didn't recognize the words, but they stirred something deep and nameless in his chest, like half-remembered music or a prayer his grandmother used to say in a language no one knew. The farmer called out to her. She looked up. Eyes were the wrong kind of quiet. By noon there were sirens. The girl didn't speak again, not in any language the paramedics recognized. She didn't resist, didn't cry, didn't seem afraid. She simply looked at each face, like she was seeing something inside them. They brought her to the clinic. Blood tests, CT scans, no injuries, no trauma. Malnourished, yes, but stable. She wouldn't say her name, wouldn't draw, wouldn't write. She only spoke when no one was looking. In the nearby town, the story spread like smoke. They said she came from nowhere, that she appeared, not walked, that her clothes were stitched with star maps, that she sang when no one listened. Some believed it was a prank, a runaway. Others said it was a warning, a sign. The media came next, but the town sheriff, Anna Cleary, pushed them back. She had a son of her own. She knew what it meant when a child wouldn't speak, and what it meant when they did. The girl was placed in temporary care. The foster family reported no trouble but strange behaviors. She watched the sky for hours. She touched books but never opened them. Sometimes she whispered at windows, and when asked simple questions, she'd answer. Not in English, not in any known language, but with words that felt like meaning. It was a week later when someone first truly heard her. Thomas May, a literature teacher at the local high school, had volunteered to help with assessments. He'd sat across from her in the interview room, expecting another dead-end conversation. She said a word, just one. His heart stopped, because it was a word he had dreamed the night before, a dream he couldn't remember fully, only fragments. Silver fog, a staircase without end, the whisper of that same word, Lyra. She said it again, looking straight at him, and then she smiled. The kind of smile that has nothing to do with joy. May didn't sleep that night. He searched dictionaries, forums, AI transcription tools, nothing. But the sound of her voice stayed in his head, repeating. And when he did finally sleep, he dreamed not of his house, not of the town, but of a place built of clouds and vines, with doorways that breathed and stars that hummed. And she was there, standing among the ruins, speaking. And this time he understood. She spoke again on a Wednesday. The room was small, no cameras this time, just a voice recorder and two people. Thomas May and Dr. Hallen, a neurologist from the capital who'd volunteered after reading the first reports. He was curious, skeptical. May was quiet, still reeling from the dream. The girl sat on the edge of her chair, hands folded, eyes half closed. Then softly, like water dripping from leaves, she began to speak. A string of words, fluid, melodic, but without repetition, without clear structure. Hallen's brows knit together. No grammatical form, no consistent phonemes, not Indo-European, not any known isolate. May, though, just sat there, frozen, because halfway through her phrase, his eyes filled with tears. She had just said the name his grandmother used to whisper in her sleep, a name he'd forgotten until this exact moment. Nirima, a name from no country, no story, no language. They started calling it the sleep tongue, not officially, but the name stuck, because others began reporting it too. Dreams, flashes of memory when she spoke. Not just May. A nurse at the clinic said the girl's murmur reminded her of a lullaby her mother used to hum, except her mother had died before she could speak. A janitor claimed he heard the girl whisper a phrase he dreamt decades ago, in a fever, a place with three suns and rivers that moved upward. It spread like quiet wildfire. Some believed it was mass suggestion, some neuro-linguistic anomaly. But no one could explain how people were remembering things they had never lived, never learned. Dreams with shape, structure, echoes, and always at the center, her voice. Dr. Hallen initiated experimental sessions. He placed subjects into lucid dream states, played back the girls' recordings while they slept. In several cases, the dreamers returned with new memories, ones that didn't match any previous data in their psychological profiles. More unsettlingly, some of them could repeat fragments of the language, but only while half asleep. Once awake, the words dissolved, like breath on glass. One subject, a linguistics postdoc named Ilya, woke up crying. She had seen a tower made of roots, a sky of dark honey, and a sentence whispered by the girl, not in sound but in color. She tried to draw it, the shape of it, and the pattern was later identified as an ancient glyph found carved into submerged stone off the coast of Crete, except that glyph had no known meaning, until now. Theories multiplied. Some called it a psychic feedback loop, others a subconscious language shaped by shared archetypes, Carl Jung's dream web. Hallen went further. He proposed that the girl wasn't speaking to them, but through them, accessing something pre-verbal. A lingua somnia, the root beneath all tongues, hidden in the architecture of sleep. May didn't disagree. He'd begun dreaming nightly now, always the same city, towering spires made of bone-white stone, windows without walls, voices like tides, and each time, the girl was there, speaking. Not as a stranger, but like someone he had known before he was born. On the 15th night, he dreamed of drowning in a field of stars. She pulled him up, laughing, and said a word that didn't translate, but he felt it. It meant, remember. It began with the drawings. A child psychologist had left paper and colored pencils in the girl's room, hoping she might communicate through images. For days, she ignored them. Then one evening, she picked up a single pencil, a dull blue, and began to draw. Not people, not animals, structures. Towers without doors, bridges that looped back into themselves. A city suspended in midair with no visible support, no physics that made sense, trees with roots above their branches. And at the bottom of every page, in the corner, a strange recurring symbol, a circle split by a spiral line. She filled over 70 pages in one night. When they showed the images to Thomas May, his hands shook. Not because of what was there, but because he had seen those places before. Not just in dreams, in flashes, reflections, the space between blinks. Others said the same. A nurse said she recognized one of the spires from a nightmare she had when she was 5. She'd drawn it in crayon back then, and her parents thought she was disturbed. A geologist who saw the images during an unrelated visit claimed one of the tower formations matched a pattern he'd mapped on ancient seabeds, topographies that shouldn't exist. It was as if the drawings were not creations, but memories. Memories no one had ever lived. Hallen took things further. He fed audio samples of the girl's speech into a generative AI designed to create visual outputs based on sound. It wasn't meant for this, but what came out silenced the entire lab. Landscapes, not abstract art, not noise, but coherent, impossible places. Vast floating monoliths, cities with inverted suns, libraries carved into clouds, oceans that looked like they were stitched from silken teeth. Some of the symbols in the generated images matched the spiral mark the girl drew in the corner of her pages. The spiral wasn't just decorative, it was a map key. A new hypothesis emerged, terrifying in its beauty. Her language was not just sound, it was a carrier of memory. Not personal, not cultural, but planetary, encoded into dreams, fossilized in sleep, the hidden history of a world that had dreamed before humans existed. She spoke again during a storm. The lights flickered in the clinic. The generator kicked in. May was there. He had started coming daily, sitting, listening. The girl looked at him and said a long phrase, one he didn't recognize, but this time he wrote it down phonetically. That night he dreamed of an underwater hall filled with statues. Each statue wore a crown made of stars. One statue opened its mouth and spoke her exact words. May woke up screaming. He knew the meaning. Not in English, not exactly, but his feeling. We are the forgetting of a greater dream. Soon after, the girl began naming people, not the ones in the room, but names no one recognized, or at least no one admitted they did, except one man, a linguistics professor visiting from Canada. When she said Elvareth dying, he went pale. That was the name of a character he had invented, in a dream, when he was 10. A story he never told anyone. A girl who could fly between thoughts. Another time, she named someone who had died in a town no one in the clinic had ever heard of. But when they looked it up, it existed. A forgotten village in the mountains. The name she gave had been on a tombstone, now cracked and overgrown. The town was changing. People stopped sleeping through the night. Not from fear, from longing. They dreamed in pieces, not of their past, but of something else. Something just beyond remembering. And the whisper in all of it was her voice. By now, the town had stopped pretending she was just a child. She didn't age. She didn't tire. She didn't ask for food, but accepted it when offered. The Foster family began waking in the middle of the night to find her standing by the window, whispering into the glass. Not like she was talking to someone outside, but like she was answering something inside. Thomas May stayed longer each visit, and one evening she finally looked at him. Really looked. Her voice when she spoke was not loud, but it landed like thunder in his chest. You are not from here. He wanted to ask what that meant, but before he could speak, she closed her eyes and said another phrase, one he hadn't heard before, yet knew without knowing. The next moment, he wasn't in the clinic anymore. He was standing on a cliff. Beneath him, a vast ocean of silver wind. Above, stars that spun in slow spirals, pulsing like breath. And in the distance, that city again, the one from all the dreams. But this time, it wasn't fading. It was waiting. He awoke on the floor, gasping. Hours had passed. No one had entered. The girl was still in her chair, watching him, smiling faintly. That night, he wrote it all down. Every dream, every word. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. When he finished, he titled the notebook, Echoes Before Language. The next day, he handed it to Dr. Hallen. Then he walked out of the clinic and didn't come back. Weeks passed. The girl's language began to change, or rather deepen. Her phrases grew slower, the syllables drawn out like echoes. She stopped speaking in front of strangers, but people who had never met her before began reporting dreams, not just of cities, but of beings, tall, faceless, made of thread and light. They spoke in the girl's voice. They whispered things that broke people into wonder. A woman in New Zealand began painting enormous murals in her sleep. A man in rural India composed a symphony based on notes he said were folded in his spine. A child in Brazil who had never learned to write began scribbling perfect replicas of the girl's glyphs on school walls. And then one morning, she was gone. The room empty. No sign of struggle, no footprints. Only a single sheet of paper on the chair, with a phrase written in the spiral symbol language. Hallen later translated its emotional content, not literal meaning, but impression. It said, I spoke until you began to remember. May was never found, but the clinic received one final envelope, months later, with no return address. Inside were 6 photos. Impossible photos. They showed the city, the towers, the sky stitched with rivers of color, and in the final image, May, standing beside the girl. Eyes closed, hand over his chest, smiling as if remembering something that had once been his name. They say the dreams haven't stopped, that the language still moves through people, not just in sleep, but in moments of silence, grief, awe. Some believe she came from the future, others from an ancient, forgotten civilization. But those who heard her voice the clearest know the truth. She wasn't from the past. She wasn't from the stars. She was from the dream of the world itself, the memory it once had, before time of what it could become. And now it's remembering.